Great, we're very glad that you are here. I'm Diane Zimmerman. I'm the director of the National Center for the Study of University Engagement, which I always say quite slowly. We're part of the office of the University of Outreach and Engagement here at MSU. A number of you were here this morning. At least I trust that you were. If you weren't, you missed a great presentation and workshop by our speaker, Dr. Kelly Ward and Tammy Moore, who were here this morning. And then we had a great lunch together, and then there were some afternoon sessions as well. But we're very pleased that you are here. We have a topic that is a little different than this morning's topic. So this afternoon we're going to be talking about managing work and family, on which Kelly has also done a great deal of research. I am going to be asking Ann Austin, professor in our Higher Adult and Lifelong Education program, to actually come in a minute and introduce Kelly. We've asked Ann. She is the first distinguished chair of the Dr. Mildred B. Erickson Chair in Higher Adult and Lifelong Education. And then Ann is a longtime friend of Kelly's and a longtime friend of ours as well. So welcome to you. Comment about Ann for me. Okay. The best exemplar I know of the ability to manage work and family with discipline, love, and graciousness. Ann, please come and introduce.
Thank you. I couldn't imagine what she was going to say. I was just getting comfortable thinking it's going to be very nice. I get to relax. I don't have to say much. I was just on the phone with someone who was inviting me to come speak at another campus, and I said, the person was suggesting the date, and I said, I've got to check with my husband because some of you know my husband. We never travel at the same time because for 20 years we've been raising children. And then in the middle of my sentence I said, actually, I probably don't even need to ask him because our two final children, who are twins, are graduating and they won't be around next fall. So I thought, my goodness, I don't have to do as much checking as normal. Oh, thank you, Diane, very, very much. This is a delight for us to have Kelly Ward with us today. Some of you did get to meet her this morning, but I appreciate Diane's invitation for me to introduce her this afternoon because she has been a professional and personal friend for some time. I think we met probably 15 years ago or so. So we've known each other for quite a long time. Our personal lives parallel in some ways, and our professional interests our research interests have crossed and touched also. Let me tell you a little of the official things about Kelly. She is an associate professor. She's at Washington State University. She's a professor of higher education in the Department of Educational Leadership and Counseling there. Previous to her time there, she was on the faculty and also an administrator at the University of Montana, and she worked with Campus Compact there some time ago. And she also was at Oklahoma State University, another point of connection we had because my own career a number of years ago also began at Oklahoma State University. Kelly also, I think many of you will be interested, has been very involved nationally. In particular, I wanted to mention her involvement in a variety of leadership roles with the Association for the Study of Higher Education, which some of the people here attend regularly. She's also been involved in other associations, but that one in particular I wanted to mention. Her research interests are distinctive and build on each other. She is a person, I think, who clearly has several areas with clear research trajectories where she's carved out particular areas of expertise and where she's sought for her expertise. This morning, many of us were able to interact with her and hear her thoughts regarding engagement. Her work for a long time has focused on the university's mission as it relates to service and engagement. As I mentioned, she's been involved in Campus Compact. She's very interested in issues of service learning. She's interested in university community partnerships. And a lot of her writing and work has focused on faculty roles and how faculty members can organize their work so that it reflects a commitment to engagement. And she's written about how to do that, how exemplars do it, and how to think about some of the reward issues that relate to that in faculty work. Another area where she's written and made very nice contributions pertain to new faculty and ways to socialize and support new faculty, which is very important because we're seeing more and more retirements and new faculty coming into the university who need to learn how to fully and productively engage in their work. She's also been involved in her teaching and in her research in areas pertaining to student affairs and multicultural teaching and learning. So you can see she has a range of interests, but they all relate very nicely. What we're focusing on, of course, this afternoon is a particular stream of her work, a really productive stream of her work, that pertains to issues around work and family, or work and personal commitments. Kelly has been one of the leaders in this area nationally, conducting research in this area. One of the terms she may speak about today that she and her colleague Lisa Wolf-Wendell, another colleague some of us in this room know, I think probably coined, is the term academic mothers and academic motherhood. And I think we see that now in the research and the literature in various places. I believe Kelly and her colleague Lisa are the originators of that. Nowadays, I think many of us know many universities, including our own, are very actively looking at ways to support both men and women who are committed to both productive and rich personal lives as well as productive and rich professional lives. And that often means for universities and colleges the challenge of thinking about what kinds of policies and practices will best support faculty members so they can manage the different dimensions of their lives in satisfying and productive ways. And Kelly's work, I think, really helps us think about the reason we would want to think about that issue and some of the ways that we could think about it. Finally, in addition to highlighting, well, before I finish highlighting her professional work, I wanted to draw your attention to the short bibliography I saw at the end of the handout that I think many of you picked up as you came in, because it certainly does not include all of the many publications that Kelly has, but in particular there's one under her name that I particularly wanted to direct you to in the Review of Higher Education. That's the academic, I didn't bring it up here with me, Academic Mothers. That's a very nice article. You'll also see several others there. There's a new book that she has some chapters in on gendered issues in higher education. You might wish to seek those publications out in particular. And then finally, I just wanted to let you know about a few little personal things. Kelly herself is an exemplar of the challenge of having a very productive, satisfying professional and personal life. During the years that I've known her, she's moved from being a graduate student through the academic ranks to achieving tenure and continuing her career. And also during that time, she has had 3 children. And I just said to her, now, is the oldest around 6? One always thinks of children as younger than they are. But I think you said the oldest is now, did you say 7 or 9? 9. So she has 3 children and a very active professional life also. So she certainly exemplifies what she's helping us to know about. I am delighted that she could come and be with us. I'm awfully glad all of you could spend a little time this afternoon, and we thank you very much for being here.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to start out just by talking about how this topic came about for me, partly because there was an article in the Chronicle where they referred to people who have babies in higher ed as breeders. So I'm a breeder because I had 3 kids. But my initial interest in this topic actually came about from when I was a graduate student. I had looked at attrition for junior faculty. And the research that was produced in the 80s and early 90s about junior faculty was a pretty negative. We refer to it as a peril and doom kind of literature that talked about salary inequities, chilly climates, and other types of inequities in the workplace. And I don't want to deny that that existed at the time and still exists, but I remember going to sessions and thinking, it seems like the field is changing. However, when we talk about faculty life, there's a tendency to focus on the negative a little bit. And I find that, I was starting to find that problematic because as a person who was actually working in the profession, I had really felt like, you know, it's the last best job, really, if you think about it. I mean, what else would we rather be doing as we're sitting there sort of lamenting the woes of faculty life? So And I also really started to feel like looking at junior faculty issues is important because, as Anne mentioned, there is this big turnover in retirements. And actually, one of the sessions that Anne did in her research on graduate students, she put up pictures that students had drawn that depicted how they felt about academic jobs. And one was the person going off the building. It was a little stick figure. And actually, I can draw it because it stuck with me. You know, it was this, and it was a stick figure, and I think there was traffic looking down, and, you know, it was sort of like, so that's a pretty troubling visual with regard to how people were thinking about the academic profession. And looking at, you know, I'm not sure if this is something that I want to do, so we're really saying it's a form of personal suicide to go into an academic career, which I thought, geez, that's a troubling notion. And so I also was feeling like, in terms of, we talk a lot about diversity in the academic pipeline and in faculty positions, and if we really want to have the best, brightest, most talented workforce, we need to think about people coming into that profession who might have multiple interests, that they might not just want to be an academic, but they in fact might want to have other interests as well. And then also, I think that the academic environment is a unique one that calls for thinking about work and family in a little bit of a different way, because the tenure clock ticks simultaneous to the very ending of a woman's biological clock. So the average age for earning the PhD is 35. The average age of moving into a tenure track position, so if you take 6 years, that's 41. So that's really the end of when a woman has the last of her fertility, if she hasn't had children already. And the original wisdom was to wait until after you had tenure to think about having a child. So those different things started making me think about, you know, what is it that we might be able to find out about work and family? Because certainly the word on the street was it's dangerous territory to enter into an academic career and wanting to have a child or wanting to have an outside interest. I know that, you know, when I was a graduate student and on the weekends, if I went skiing or something, you know, they'd be like, don't tell anybody. And I'd say, well, Pat Teranzini, he's an accomplished skier. He was on the ski team at Dartmouth. Of course I'm going to tell him. They're like, no, they won't think you're serious. So, and you know, never mind having a baby. That really was an indication of not being serious. And the literature about faculty sort of affirmed that. It affirms that the academic profession is one that's greedy. It calls for total allegiance. And also, motherhood is a greedy institution and calls for total allegiance, especially from women. And so I went into this also with the notion of academic work never ends, unlike other professions. I mean, I literally right now could work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I would still have more to do. So I think, well, why bother? If I still have more to do, I might as well work less. But there is the idea out there that you have to, there's always more to do, always another book to read, always another paper to grade, always another project to conceptualize. So those things from the literature helped shape my thinking as I ventured into this project. So in 2000, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation was looking at work and family across different fields. They have numerous initiatives at campuses throughout the country in different independent research centers looking at work and family. And then they had this small cluster of funding available to look specifically at work and family issues within the academic workplace. And so my colleague Lisa Wolf and I had applied for a grant from the Sloan Foundation initially to look at women faculty at research universities. So because we were both tenure track faculty at the time, we did the research university study and then paused, wrote that up, thought about a larger project. And then we, you know, so much of the research is done by faculty at research universities about other faculty at research universities. And recognizing that that's only a small part of the academic workplace, we then went on to interview 30 women at liberal arts colleges, 30 at community colleges, and 30 at regional and comprehensive institutions. So collectively that comprises the first phase of this study, which I'll tell you about some of those findings. The second phase of this project is we interviewed, we looked at the departmental context. One of the major findings is, and this actually relates also to what I was talking about this morning with engagement, it's really at the department level where faculty life is brokered, so to speak. So even if we have really progressive institutional climates, it really depends on the actual department. And so we then went on to interview faculty members with children and without, senior, junior, and department chairs in 6 different departments. And now the part of the project that I'm involved in is funded by the American Association for University Women, their educational foundation. I'm now doing a follow-up study to look at the ongoing impact of work and family, because not only does academic work never end, but parenthood doesn't end. And I think the pinch really for women is in the early phase of childhood and the early phase of parenthood. And I really wanted to look at the physical aspects of pregnancy and childbirth. But I also now want to know, because there's really concerns about women in the pipeline. We've done pretty good. You know, in a lot of campuses, you know, at WSU last year, 43 of incoming faculty were women. So they're feeling pretty good about that. That's really variable by discipline. But at the associate level, it's 30%, and then at the senior level, it's 20%, and that hasn't changed much. So the idea is that if 43% are new, then we're automatically going to see that progression to the senior level, and that actually has not happened. And I think part of the piece of that puzzle is work and family. So I wanted to know what's the ongoing impact of work decisions in light of family and family decisions in light of work. So that's where the project is right now. So what I want to do today is talk about some of the macro kinds of findings. I'm doing sort of a project summary. It worked out well. I was asked to do, the Teachers College Record has an online kind of current topics, current issues, and they wanted me to provide sort of a big picture of the findings. So it coincides nicely with this. So I can talk to you specifically about any aspect of the project, but today I wanted to highlight some of the major findings. And there's 2 kind of clusters to the findings, and sort of the individual level and what we found out from talking to individual faculty about their daily lives and their lived experience, and then the more macro level, kind of looking at what implications these findings have for institutional policy and the institutions where people work. So to start, the first theme, looking at individuals, is timing. Timing is a really, really big preoccupation with regard to, for junior faculty in particular, in terms of, you know, when's a good time to have a baby? And there really isn't a good time to have a baby. There's probably not a bad time to have a baby either, but I get asked every time I give one of these talks, someone comes up to me afterwards and said, when should I have a baby? It's like, well, I don't know. One, it assumes that you can control that to the nanosecond, which, you know, it feels like a lot of times you can until you try. So that is a huge preoccupation. And also, it was kind of an interesting, when we talked to department chairs, they do a lot of mentoring about timing, which I thought was really interesting. So when we said when we were asked department chairs sort of follow-up questions about timing, their advice to new faculty is not to have a child. If, you know, to wait a little bit, that it's not sort of recommended for the weak-willed to try having a baby in light of a tenure process. So this issue of timing is on people's minds. And also, if you follow work and family conversations in the Chronicle of Higher Education, timing is a big preoccupation. They always have a work and family article in May or June where they talk about the annual baby boom for people who do try to time their baby to coincide with summer. And then there was also one article in last year in upstate New York. I can't remember the name. I can't remember what college it was. One of the Sage colleges, I think. They had 3 faculty members at the same time who had a baby in a communications department, and that department chair thought, bad timing. You weren't thinking about me having to schedule classes. So this issue of timing is on people's mind. And then one of the other things we found is actually people manage this pretty well. I did go into this study initially finding out how is it that people manage work and family, and I was happy to hear that there's good news to this. When the overall tenor of our interviews were not ones of you know, tears and bloodshed. The overall sense was it's actually a pretty good gig in terms of if you have to work in a faculty position and have children. This was especially true for women at community colleges who in most instances had worked in another sector prior, because if you've worked in the corporate environment where you're really more tied to a 9-to-5 kind of schedule, for them coming into a faculty position, they thought, this is nothing. Or people who worked in the technology sector and then moved into a community college, or into the community college setting, when you could compare being an academic to other settings, they say, why would anybody complain about this? It's great. In the middle of the day, if I need to, I can go to an appointment. I can schedule my classes. Usually once you work someplace for a while, you can schedule classes at days and times that you prefer. So they really saw that there was a good combination. One of the other things that we don't often talk about is this notion of buffering. Work really buffers family. Being a mother is not all roses. It can be a very challenging enterprise. And we don't like to talk about how nice it is to leave your kids at home and go to work. My husband was a stay-at-home dad for a long time, and I clearly had the better job, because I'd be leaving him and crying, spit up. I'd like, gotta go to work. And I'd go to lunch, and I worked hard, but I could also, my day was my own. When you're an academic, you really can carve out the day how you want it to be. Whereas as a parent, it's pretty intense. So there is a buffering aspect. And the opposite is true too. I interviewed some women who actually hadn't got tenure. They did not get tenure. I actually interviewed a woman, and she and her husband both didn't get tenure. And she said, thank God I had kids, because that was a really intense period of life for a couple both not to have children, to not have tenure, and then having a child really buffers some of the realities of the workplace. And it really adds perspective too, because you have a bad day at work, and then you go home and there's your cute cooing baby, and then you go, oh yeah, okay. And there's no longer the ability to be consumed with work. And pretty much we did learn about the consuming nature of the academic profession, and having a child adds quite a bit of perspective of that. One of the other things that we found is that the autonomy and flexibility afforded in academic work actually blends well with having a child. And the flip side of that is that academic work does never end. It's something you can do at 4 o'clock in the morning. One of the questions we asked in the initial interviews was to talk about daily life. And some people were getting up at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, and then you work 4 hours before your kids get up, and then you get the kids off to school, and then you work at night. So people have really onerous schedules, because you can read books any place, anytime. And there was a lot of sneaking in of work. Almost to a person, people really, we asked a question about what their life was like before, what their academic life was like before children and after children. And almost to a person, people really had workaholic tendencies. I think the academic workplace fosters workaholism, because you can do it all the time. And plus, we enjoy it. When I'm sitting there reading a book about academic issues, it's not, sometimes I'm doing it because I have to, but I usually am really enjoying that. So it's not like other kinds of things that you don't enjoy. But it amounts to a lot of hours. And so that was a challenge, especially when you're a new parent, you're used to working all the time, suddenly you have a child and you can't work all the time. That creates a lot of tension. And then one of the other findings was about unclear expectations. The academic workplace is sort of known for lack of clarity with regard to promotion and tenure. What do I have to do? How many top-tier journal articles do I have to have? Is it okay if things are collaborative? I got a grant, but this morning we heard about the need to have grants from certain kinds of venues. So there's a lot of ambiguity. And this was, in particular, the less clear an institution's mission, the more ambiguity that there is. So at regional institutions in particular, and what I would refer to as institutions that are trying to climb the academic ladder, a lot of times there's a real lack of clarity with regard to what expectations there are for tenure. And so this is an issue for all faculty, but it's in particular an issue for new faculty, and then also if you're a new faculty member, plus you add a child to the mix. Again, when you can't work all the time, there's an anxiety associated with watching everybody else work all the time to sort of accomplish the goals that seem uncertain, and then at 5 o'clock you have to go home because you have to go be a mom. So those unclear expectations, it seemed to be magnified for this particular group. And then one of the other findings is fear. Lisa and I wrote an article called The Fear Factor, because we heard a lot about fear. Fear about having a baby. If I have a baby, will I be taken seriously? Fear about using policies. If I take time off, am I going to miss something? Will I lose the ability to teach a particular class if I take time off? Fear about getting tenure. If I have a child, is it going to jeopardize my ability to get tenure? And then a real fear about not taken seriously. So if I have a child, is that an indication that I'm not taking my job seriously? So to switch a little bit to some perspectives on institutional environments, one of the outcomes of people being fearful about their jobs is about silence. And there was a big environment of don't ask, don't tell, don't instigate. And we're familiar with that from the military policy. And silence is really golden when having a baby. And we were really interested in this because this is true for department chairs too. So one of the questions we asked department chairs, what kind of policies do you think should be available? So, and I was pleased with how progressive I felt department chairs were about what kinds of policies they felt should be available for, not just for women faculty, but for all faculty having a child. So then a follow-up question was, okay, Mary Lou had a baby last semester. What kind of policies were available to her? Oh, we didn't talk about it. So it's like here we have this call for policy, but then they don't talk about policy. And then the same was true for Mary Lou. She wouldn't mention it a lot of times. So we were surprised at how little was known about the policy environment. So a lot of times we had the policies in hand, and then we would ask department chairs and we asked faculty about what policies were available. And we were pretty surprised at what people did not know about their own policy environment. There was a real assumption that whatever was available I wouldn't use or wouldn't be helpful, so I didn't even look. A majority of the people were not aware of the policies available on their own campus, which I thought was a very interesting finding. And I think that is a consequence of fear. So again, when someone has a child, there's sort of the pleasantries associated with having a child in terms of we had a shower, we had a party, but in terms of actually having a conversation about policy, how are we going to cover your classes, pretty much what happens is the individual woman comes up with a plan. So, so-and-so is going to cover my classes for those 2 weeks. I probably can get back into the classroom right away. I mean, people are back in the classroom. It is scary. There was one woman on the way, she taught human development, so she wanted her students to see her baby. On the way home from having a baby, she stopped in at her class. So on the one hand you think, oh, that's kind of neat. But on the other hand you think, that's sick. That this idea that you're right back at work. So, and that was pretty prevalent. People take off and really, Lisa Wolf-Wendell, my colleague, she's like, I'm not proud of it, but I was back there a week later. And I felt pretty good after I had a baby. I was up and running. I mean, that's not always the case. So you kind of thought, well, I guess I could teach my class, because it is a pain to cover classes. Covering classes is the biggest obstacle here, because you can read, you can write, get into research right away, but the physical aspect of covering classes and going to meetings is the most challenging. And covering classes it's the biggest pain for department chairs. I mean, that's kind of what they say they have to cover, and that's what individual faculty, they come up with these pretty elaborate plans. They then present the plan to a department chair for sort of a nod on how to take care of that. So faculty go to great lengths to make it work. And Bob Drago and Carol Kolbeck do work family research at Penn State. And one of the things they talk about is bias avoidance, that people go to great lengths to avoid bias. So one of the ways that they do that is through having their baby in the academic off season, as I call it, so either at summer or Christmas time. And then also coming up with strategies so that it'll have the least possible impact on the department. So that's one of the ways that people avoid, they anticipate that there's going to be bias, and the way they avoid it is to not make waves. One of the other findings at the institutional level is related at the department level. So regardless of how progressive an institutional policy might be, it really is brokered at the departmental level. And so the department chair and senior colleagues are really key in terms of how people feel about taking leave and what leave opportunities they feel are available. And so, and this is particularly important due to the uncertainty of the policy environment. The department chair is really the person that communicates, here's what's available, here's what the options are, here's how other people have handled it. And so it's really at the department level where the concern lies. So there kind of are big findings at both the individual and institutional level. So you know, I always ask my students, so I always pose the question to myself, which is, so what, and now what? So some of the policies that we've been calling for and thinking about at the institutional level is, one is campuses really need to have more than the Family Medical Leave Act. And we were surprised at the number of campuses, and when you ask department chairs, well, we're covered by FMLA, which basically says you're automatically granted 12 weeks of unpaid leave with the event of a family event. So if you have a child, or if you need dependent care, elder care, different family events. But, you know, it's unpaid. And 12 weeks, you know, some people say 12 weeks, pretty good. But if, in terms of how, depending on when you have your child in relationship to the semester, it can cut across in sort of an awkward kind of way. So campuses really need to think more than just having FMLA. It's an important safeguard to have there. But what ended up happening is, once FMLA came into place, a lot of campuses set up, you know, we're covered. We actually have a pretty good policy, but we need to have more than that. One of the things we recommend when it's possible is to think in terms of a 16-week leave, if there's a 16-week semester. And that might not be a total leave, but with regard to teaching. One of the other suggestions, of course, when possible, is to have a paid leave. And the campuses that have paid leaves, people use them a lot more, as you might imagine. And there was a lot less anxiety associated with using policies if paid leave was available, although that's, you know, is sort of limited to the most wealthy of campuses. Another suggestion is to have stop clock policies be automatic. Most campuses, you can apply to stop the tenure clock for all different kinds of reasons. If you have a hard time getting your lab started, if you have a child, if you get sick, if someone in your family gets sick, if you've had technology problems, and you can apply for it. But one of the things that campuses are starting to do now is, as soon as you basically add your child to your insurance, that your tenure clock process stops automatically. There's some controversy associated with that, but what that does is it takes away from the junior faculty member having to ask permission of a senior departmental chair. So that is one suggestion. Another is to offer part-time options for the short term. You know, we have this very either-or with regard to the tenure track, that you're either full-time or you're either full-time and on the tenure track, or you're part-time and off the tenure track. And some campuses are starting to look at having part-time options for a short period of time, so say the year that you have a child, or if you have a child with complications, which is not uncommon to happen, that you would have a part-time section in the tenure track, and then the tenure track would be extended for the amount of time that you were part-time. Another is having childcare available. As campuses are being more progressive, they're actually marketing themselves with having really good childcare opportunities available, if they're available, because it's a big concern, especially in small places like Pullman, Washington. We're sort of a captive community, and it's really hard to get infant care there. So people actually are discouraged sometimes for coming to Pullman. So places like Pullman, they're a little behind the eight ball in terms of having a lot of child care, infant care available. But campuses that do have strong infant care, they actually advertise and say that we give priority to faculty as a form of recruitment. Another is having modified duty options, and I think this is actually an easy policy to put in place. So to have maybe in 1 year, if you teach a 2-2 course load, perhaps you would teach a 1-1 course load, then maybe pick up something in the summer, that you might teach a class online instead of face-to-face. So thinking about how people's responsibilities can be modified early, soon after having a child. So sort of the overall institutional suggestion is that there needs to be institutionalized policies, but there needs to be flexibility with having that. Some other policy considerations is how important it is with regard to recruitment. I think as work and family issues have become more on the table, and as campuses have become more progressive with having policies, they are using it as a way to recruit really quality faculty. And there are some campuses where we interviewed, especially with regard to dual career couples, they're being really progressive about bringing couples in together and having spousal hiring. And so they're able to really bring in a much higher quality faculty than they would be otherwise. One of the other policy considerations to think about is really adopting a life course perspective. You know, the tenure track is this really short period of time that unfortunately coincides with, you know, you're new, it takes a long time to get collaboration set up, and, you know, I understand and I see the utility of it, but sometimes it takes a long time. We talked this morning with regard to creating community partnerships. It takes a long time to sometimes get a research agenda established. And so I think we need to take, I mean, I'm not at all, someone has always, this one of my colleagues, Bill Tierney, who studies faculty things, he said, be careful what you're asking for there. And I'm not calling for that tenure should be done away with, but I think we need to think about the whole faculty career in a slightly more rhythmic way. I feel like right now it's you're sort of out of the chute and you go, 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 go until you get a lifelong parking permit, which happens when you're retired, right? So I think we need to have a more rhythmic approach to that. So at certain periods of time there might be lulls in productivity, but at other times there would be spikes in productivity. I mean, I was talking to this one woman and she was saying, if I looked at it over the course of time, you know, my first 3 years here, I worked 80 to 90 hours a week. So if I take some time off now, it basically, you know, is evening out. But we don't see it that way. But I think that we should. Also, there's a lot more research being generated about policy, and you know, a lot of the research that's done about higher education is underutilized. I know on my own campus, where I'm actually familiar with the committee, when they started looking at work-life issues, they started from scratch. And it's like, oh, there's all these information, and I came and I gave a presentation and I talked about that. But a lot of times we're not building on the resources that already exist. Another thing is to address this fear, there needs to be a lot more awareness of policies and to publicize policies so that everybody is aware of what is available. So to have websites, a lot of campuses now through their human resources unit will have a section on the web that's called work-life, work-family balance, or a work-life person who makes available and makes aware what the policies are, and then also just what's available in a particular community with regard to child care and summer camps and that type of thing. One of the other things I think we need to do is we need to normalize more having a child. I think right now, if you have a child, it's still sort of this taboo kind of thing in particular departments, and I think we just need to have the conversation more. And not that everyone's going to have, not that every person in the department is going to have a child, or everyone is going to have one, but that we really need to bring these work and family issues out of the closet by having it be part of department chair orientation, new faculty orientation, graduate student orientations, and so that way if someone does have a child, it's part of the picture. It would also make it, I think, more inclusive for men and women. Right now, there's a danger. I don't think we want to say that it's the same for everyone, that men and women both have children, and because they do, but I think we want to stay aware that it is that parenthood is a gendered phenomenon, and it is experienced differently for men and women. So even though policies need to be available for both men and women, it's different if you've had the child, and it's also different if you're the primary caretaker of the child. So we want to continue to, and I'm still puzzling with how to frame this, because we want to stay aware of gender, but at the same time we want to be more inclusive of gender, because the second shift is alive and well. A lot of the women in the study really talked about that they still are doing a lot of the primary care of the child. So even if their husbands are supportive, that they're really doing the bulk of the child care, the anticipatory parenting, and the emotional parenting. And so I think by having a more inclusive perspective, and this is true in all sectors, not just in higher education, it will bring men more actively into the parenting role, but at the same time, we want to be aware of the differences that exist for men and women in that. So that's something that we need to pay attention to. One of the other things is that one size fits all does not necessarily work. Again, it's important to have the policy available, but to be aware of meeting individual needs as well. So just to summarize, I think the future health and vitality of the academic workplace depends on a more holistic and healthy and transparent perspective on work and family. And there needs to be a greater synergy between the personal and the professional, of which family is part of. And I think in terms of having a more holistic workplace, a more healthy workplace, that will ultimately create a more productive, talented, and diverse faculty, which I think is in the best interest of higher education. So with that, I will turn it over to questions. In this very warm, late afternoon room.
Kelly, I don't have a question, it's more of a comment. I couldn't agree with you more. I run the Family Resource Center on campus, which is the work-life office of the university that you spoke of, and it's really encouraging for me that you reinforce everything that we know to be true on the campus, the folks that have been working hard to change the climate and the culture, because that's so much what it is, and about being at an individual departmental level, whether the dean or the chair or the supervisor make those recommendations. But I also like to emphasize, and I'm familiar with Bob Drago and his bias avoidance work, that it's important that we also look at the full lifespan approach, because life happens, and whether it's the birth of a baby or an illness of a family member, we've got the elder care issues, and you did mention about FMLA that we really need to attend to as well, because we can't plan for an elder care crisis. When you have a child, as you talked about with the timing, there's some planning that can go with that, and that by the time they're 18, then you know you're pretty well, they're on their own. But elder care is a huge issue that's happening for the families as well. So I think we need to continue to include that in part of the discussion. Because if you've got a mother who needs to go to her appointments because of her Alzheimer's, or your father fell and broke his hip in Florida and needs to be moved in with you, there are times where people have to take time off work for a month at a time to deal with elder care crises. So, and that's my emphasis here, is that we're about life and the personal work family balance.
Right.
That's also a burden that tends to fall more on women than
Exactly.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave early. I have to pick up my daughter from soccer. So I think attention to gender is important. Yeah, but see, but I think the men's issues really is a tricky one.
Yeah.
Because you either find that you're either totally misunderstood or treated like a champion when you do kind of normal things. A question, did you find a difference between how women experienced fear or bias based on the gender composition of the faculty? If it was a predominantly a department or a school or unit that was mostly women, did that make a difference? Or if you were one or two women in a department that was mostly men. So kind of looking broader at the context of the department, how did that, or how would you think that might affect some of your findings?
Well, you know, women are really mean to other women. So, you know, people talk about the sciences being more inhospitable to women, and we actually found the more collaborative nature of the sciences actually created a more hospitable environment. At one point we were talking about some of the departmental findings, and we referred to new age departments, because in the sciences, and this may just be the campuses that we went to, but we found that there was a lot more different kinds of configurations of people. One works a lot more collaborative. So if you were to be gone out of your lab, labs are tricky because they run on a 24/7 schedule in a lot of instances, which is very difficult for work family things. You also a lot of times can't bring a child to a lab. Like if I need to run into my office, I can bring my kids. Certain labs you cannot bring a child. In certain buildings you can't bring a child into because of chemicals and that kinds of thing. So the lab part is difficult. However, labs run in a whole system. So if the woman is in charge of the lab and leaves for a while, there's usually a whole stable of people behind you to help support that. So that actually helps. The collaborative nature of the sciences helps in this case. There was also a lot more configurations of scientists being married to other scientists, and so it was a more family-oriented environment in that regard in terms of having departmental retreats and parties. There seemed to be more family orientation to that. But the hardest people, and this was kind of, the women, when we talked to them, they were saying a lot of times the senior women in departments had actually foregone having children, and those were a lot of times the people that were most critical of, what's with the accommodation? I did it, and I didn't have any help, and so why are we bending over backwards to help these new people? So I was actually surprised and dismayed, because there's been this idea that if we have more women, it's going to get better, but the women were less charitable than with other women. The other thing we found is most of the department chairs were male with the women that we interviewed, and a lot of times they actually had children who were dealing with work-family issues, and that is something we found over and over again. So when you have a department chair who themselves has, a lot of times, if they're a grandparent and they actually are involved in their grandkid's life, they actually have a more empathetic perspective because they're seeing their daughter or their son also navigating work and family kinds of things. So that was a big finding of the study. If the department chair sort of had a personal relationship to work and family, they actually could be a lot more sympathetic and understanding compared to if they did not. So there's very interesting gendered aspects to this for the whole department.
I'm curious about, I think something that she brought up, this issue of rhetoric. So work-family is sometimes how this is talked about, work-life, how it's thought about. In sort of the management literature, I know there was for a while a backlash in terms of, do single people who have to, for whatever reason, taking care of a parent or some other obligations that aren't sort of these that you're talking about, has there been, I don't know, is there a discussion policy-wise on campus, or is this really about sort of the work-family thing? Has that rhetoric evolved at all? I'm not sure if I'm being clear.
Yeah, it has. I mean, what's your name?
Lori.
Lori? Like Lori mentioned, a work-life perspective. I mean, most of the offices are actually called work-life because it is taking more of a life course perspective. And, there is, for a while there was a bit of a backlash. I use the Chronicle as sort of my gossip column of higher education, right? So you follow the conversations. There was one just in last week saying, a letter to the editor saying, we're hearing about, there's these women in the sciences, 6 women who kind of are chronicling their careers. It's been going on, it's about 2 years now. They're called Generation X women. I can't remember, but they're in the career section. And they have sort of dispatches at periodic intervals. And somebody else wrote in saying, I'm kind of sick of hearing about this work-life stuff. It's a personal choice. If you decide to have a child, then you basically do so at your own, do it at your own risk, which is the prevailing wisdom in higher education. And when I read that, I do sometimes say, yeah, there is a point being made there. And I think what's happened with the accommodation is there's sometimes people feel like, well, she's getting accommodation because she had a baby, and now I'm having to pick up the slack, or I'm having to work all the time. So I think what's happened is there's concern, people are concerned about going into the professorate, not just because of work and family. I mean, this person that wants to jump, I don't know if that was because of work life. This is about the call to work all the time, and to work all the time in very specific ways. And so I think that's actually created, it's opened up the rhetoric.
And that's what I mean, I think this notion of opening up the rhetoric, because there's many reasons why someone might desire or need a flexible, more flexible work schedule.
Well, also, I mean, what about just being like healthy, interesting people who aren't consumed with work? I mean, God forbid, we wouldn't want that to happen. I mean, there's these terrible stories of, my neighbor is sings opera on the weekends, and I've worked with him for 15 years, and I never knew that. So that there's this real separation between work and life. And so I think it did start out with talking about work and family balance, but I'm seeing now that that's opening. In part, I think Anne's research has actually really done a lot to change and to open up that rhetoric, because there is concern about people not wanting to go into the profession because of this perspective. One of the things we found in interviewing women who were not at research universities, one of the reasons they were opting, people were intentional about not wanting to work in the research university setting, and that they saw, you know, I want to be at a liberal arts college because I just graduated from MIT and that place is crazy. Those people work all the time and I want to have a life. And for them, part of that involved having a child, but also, you know, I play piano and I want to, you know, be in the choir at church, or, you know, whatever it is. Right. So I think that's kept the conversation moving on to have a more balanced life. And I think it's healthier. I mean, there's autoimmune deficiencies associated with work problems, and, you know, it's not necessarily a good thing that we've had this workaholic tendency in higher education. So I think the larger conversation is really about that.
It's about the culture giving permission for people to have a life outside of their job and not feel guilty about it, whether it's to do volunteer work, to take your dog to the vet. It could be for your sibling who has MS, or, you know, it doesn't matter what the reason is, and that's the kind of flexibility an institution needs to provide. We shouldn't have to ask the question, why do you need that time? We should know that people are grown-ups and they're in charge of themselves and they know how to get the work done, whether it's at 3 o'clock in the morning, or that's the FaceTime issue. That's huge too.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not at your desk, then you're not doing your work, which isn't always the case. So.
Right. Well, you know, academic organizations are total organizations where you can, mental institutions are as well, healthcare institutions are as well. You can do everything you need to do on a campus. You can take a shower, you can eat, you can sleep. You really never have to leave if you think about it. And I'm not recommending it, but you can. That's true at hospitals as well. It's true in mental institutions. You know, you live there. It's a 24/7 kind of cycle. And so I think what ends up happening is, because you can do the work 24/7 and have all your needs met there, you know, in a lot of instances, the perspective is there's no need to leave. And I think it has really fostered this idea that you need to work all the time.
You spoke this morning about engaged. I missed it, unfortunately, but about engagement with communities. And there's a certain amount of fear that goes along with that. I was curious how is that fear amplified for somebody, say, for instance, a woman dealing with a young child and approaching tenure, or is there an opportunity in community engagement for greater flexibility?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, one of the things that, in putting together these two talks, I actually started to see a lot of different overlap. I mean, my recommendations actually are really similar, because people do scholarship regarding to the community on the sly as well. You know, people don't really understand it. A lot of times it goes unreported. It's amazing the kind of things people do in the community, and they don't report it. I did a study a couple years ago on consulting faculty that do a lot of great work in the community through consulting, and they never report it. And so, because it's like, well, it doesn't really fit, and I'm not sure if I should really be doing it, so I'm not going to report it. So I think, and that in part is associated with fear. So what we found, a lot of these things exist: unclear expectations, ambiguity, the call to work all the time exists for everybody, uncertainty about engagement. But when you add a small child to the mix, also would be true if you add an ailing parent to the mix, it amplifies whatever it is that's going on. So, you know, and that certainly would hold true with regard to engagement. However, at the same time, one of the things it can also do is create, there's ways, for example, to be involved in doing kinds of research in things that relate to what your child might be interested in your community. So conceivably, there could be synergy in that regard. So that if you have your students involved in service learning projects, they could be in your child's school. So there'd be a way that you'd be able to, maybe you yourself have a hard time getting into school to volunteer because you're working full-time, but through your students' work, you could be involved. Or creating involvement for undergraduate students in different kinds of research projects that you might also be able to involve your children in. So I think in that way it can create synergy.
Kelly, thank you so much. We appreciate it. I'd like to invite you to continue the conversation with Kelly and with Tammy. We have a wine and cheese reception upstairs in the Carnice room. I think you can take either the steps or the elevator, and it's in the big pretty section at the far end. So please join us for that from 5 to 6. And again, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors of this, the College of Nursing, the Family Resource Center, the Women's Resource Center, and the Dr. Mildred B. Erickson Distinguished Chair in Higher Adult and Lifelong Education. Thank you again so much for being here, and Kelly and Tom. Thank you.